Okay, so firstly, in order to determine whether or not Ukraine can win, firstly, we need to define what winning is. And according to the Ukrainians, the soldiers on the front line and the government and whatnot, it is basically liberating all of the held territory from the Russians. So that means they'll have to liberate these four oblasts here. So you've got the Kherson down the bottom, you've got Zaporizhia, Donetsk, and Luhansk. They're the four regions which Russia's trying to annex, which probably do have like a strong Russian influence in that area. And then you also have Crimea as well. So for Ukraine to win, they need to take all these five regions or oblast. All right, guys. So what we're going to be covering here on our agenda. Firstly, it's aircraft of the Ukrainian Air Force. Secondly, ships or the Navy of Ukraine. Thirdly, armored vehicles, so that's tanks, HIMARS, infantry fighting vehicles, etc. Then we've got manpower, so how many soldiers Ukraine can muster to fight off the Russians. And finally, ammunition, so how many shells and bullets and all that great stuff the Ukrainians need to defeat Russia. And finally, we'll be covering the Russian losses. So this will be pretty interesting and probably won't be too nice for the Russian viewers. All right, guys. So firstly, let's just have a look at the aircraft of the Ukrainians. So what I did here is I just grabbed all the data from Wikipedia and I put in the first column. Then I went to Oryx and checked the confirmed losses, and then in the final column you can see the remaining aircraft which Ukraine supposedly has left. So you can see here you've got the MiG-29, the Sukhois, Su-24, Su-25, Su-27, and the Bayraktar TB2, which is obviously a Turkish drone. So yeah, it's a drone. It's not technically an aircraft, but we'll just categorize it here for the time being. So firstly, look at the MiG-29s. Pre-war they had 51. They've lost at least 15. They've still got 36, so that's pretty good from the Ukrainians. And then the Sukhois, Su-24, 25, they've had heavy losses. It looks like they've only got a couple of those aircraft left, and you've got Su-27, which still has 28. So um, they've suffered quite a lot of losses there, and those numbers are really small in comparison to what the Russians have and what the Russians can actually deploy in field. And then you got the Bayraktar TB2s, so there has been 14 confirmed losses. So if you follow Oryx, you'll be able to see how many have actually been lost. How many Ukraine had pre-war, it's not really known exactly. And how many they have right now flying in the skies, no one really knows. That'll be a state secret in which they won't be disclosing. However, there hasn't been losses for the last few months, and there has been a lot of footage recently, so perhaps that means there's not many TB2s left, or if they do have them, they're just keeping them in reserve for the time being. And also, that could be due to stronger Russian air defenses as well. Okay, guys, so this is the current Ukrainian fleet. So as you can see, it's quite small. They've only got a few sort of surface ships. Most of these types are like patrol boats, missile boats, and the displacements are really small. So they're really small, maybe like less than the US Coast Guard if you put them in comparison. So, you know, if there's no Nimitz class aircraft carriers here or like submarines from the Ukrainians, they can't really do any power projection with the current fleet. of Navy ships. All right. All right, so you might be wondering, like, why is the Ukrainian Navy so weak? It's a pretty good question. Firstly, it wasn't really that weak up until the start of the war. However, the Russians really put a number on the Ukrainians. So basically, Ukraine pretty much lost its entire navy. Like, so Ukraine, there's a joke right now about Ukraine having no navy, but still sinking the Moskva, which is a flagship of the Russian Black Sea Fleet. So you can see here, according to Oryx, 21 confirmed losses by the Ukrainians, and that does also include the frigate. Yeah, so that was actually scuttled by the Ukrainians to prevent it being captured by the Russians, and I think that was the only frigate that the Ukrainians had. So in a way, it was sort of the equivalent of the flagship for the Ukraine Navy. All right, let's just start with the MBTs, the big guys, the main battle tanks. So right here, similar to the what I did with the aircraft, I listed all the supposed pre-war figures of the Ukrainians, like what tanks they had, what classes or the types they had. Just to let you know that the types, there are different types of, or variants of these Russian tanks, and they do vary quite a bit, especially like when you get to T90s and you're upgrading them. There's a big difference in the quality of those tanks. A bit like the American Abrams tanks. They've been fielding Abrams for literally decades, but the most recent ones are way more powerful than the original ones of the 1970s and 80s. But I digress a bit. So let's just have a look. So pre-war, they had probably close to 1,000 or so tanks. Since then, they have been acquired more tanks. So they've either been captured from the Russians or they've been donated by European or NATO allies. There's also suffered quite a few losses, so you can see that in the third column. So quite a lot of T-64s, T-72s, T-80s. However, even though they've lost quite a few tanks there, they still have hundreds of tanks remaining, which is good for the Ukrainians. Next we have is the pretty popular HIMARS system, which is MLRS, which is a multiple rocket launch system. Okay, so currently Ukraine has 20 of them, and the US Department of Defense have announced that they're going to provide another 18 HIMARS, so there's going to be 38 in total, as well as the ammunition for that as well. So 38 in total HIMARS. So that's probably going to be a very big boost to Ukraine, and they can target Russian troops from quite a long distance as well, and they're very accurate. So this will be a very big part of the Ukrainian defense as well. So it's good to see from the Ukrainian side. Okay, so let's just have a look at the manpower for the Ukrainians. So Ukraine's a pretty large country. Pre-war, they had about 45 million population. Available manpower, 22 million. Fit for service, 15.6 million. Reaching military age, 481,000. And then you can see the total military personnel, 500,000. Active personnel 200, reserve 250, and parliamentary. So it's so obviously it's a big country, big population. They did announce general mobilization quite a few months ago. Men of fighting age are not allowed to actually leave Ukraine. So they've got a large base of reserves to be able to fight the Russians as well. So there's no shortages of men, but it also depends on the how well they can be trained, how well they can be equipped, if they have enough ammunition and weapons to supply literally hundreds of thousands of soldiers, because at the same time the Russians are also mobilizing. All right, guys, so I just found this article. It was on the ABC News website, which is the Australian government website, Australian Broadcasting Channel, which is similar to the PBS in the US or the BBC in the UK. And basically, what this article describes basically says the United States has supplied Ukraine with quite a lot of ammunition, and it could potentially, well, the US may potentially not want to supply or not be willing to or not being able to supply Ukraine with more ammunition, as it could jeopardize its own defensive stockpiles. So one of the crucial areas will probably be the artillery shells. Yeah, so it says here that the amount of shells the US provided to Ukraine is close to the limit that it is willing to give without risking its own warfighting capabilities. And however, if you do have a read of this, it does say that the US is draining its own supplies, but the US is committed, like they'll supply Ukraine with what they can to win the war. All right, guys, so just went to Oryx, and this is really interesting. So if you're following the war in Ukraine, you'll probably see like daily images of like tanks and APCs and IFVs of the Russians getting destroyed. So this website basically collects all that data and lists them here with photographic evidence. And as you can see here, the total of the Russian losses is 7,583. Okay, and this is like pretty significant as well. This is like jets and tanks and infantry vehicles, trucks, and all those military vehicles and equipment is very expensive. So like even a bodgy tank could be like $1 or $2 million. So if you think about the actual losses in monetary terms, it'll probably be in the billions of dollars. But Russia does have the money to actually sustain those financial losses. However, replacing literally thousands of vehicles, that's going to be a big drain on the Russians. So obviously they still have a large stockpile from the Cold War if they've been able to lose this significant amount of equipment and still continue fighting. However, the logistics of that, like supplying the front lines with hundreds of vehicles or thousands of vehicles, isn't going to be easy. It's going to require a lot of manpower, a lot of logistics, supply lines, and maintenance as well. So, and if you think about it, like if the Russians were just losing a few soldiers per vehicle, then they would have easily lost thousands of soldiers. So a lot of trained soldiers, experienced soldiers, probably would have been killed or destroyed with these vehicles as well if they weren't able to escape or if they didn't retreat in time. So this is a significant number. It's really massive, actually. I don't think there's been too many militaries, like modern militaries, who has been able to sustain this amount of losses and continue fighting. So that really just shows how massive the Russian army is and how much they're willing to actually lose and continue fighting. Yeah, but I guess, do they have a limit to how much they can lose? How many factories do they have, or how many warehouses full of tanks and fighting vehicles and APCs do they have remaining? Which is probably still a lot. However, they still need to be fielded. They still need to be manned. So yeah, it's really interesting. And then on the other hand as well, the Ukrainians would have spent a lot of ammunition destroying these vehicles, thousands of them. So how many shells they have launched, or how many HIMARS or javelins they would have had to fire to destroy these vehicles. So it just shows like how massive this war is. All right, guys, so that's pretty much wraps it up for my presentation. It's just a few things which I've been able to collect and what I've been personally analyzing. A lot of it's been analyzed or collected by other parties as well. So using Oryx and Wikipedia, there'll be a lot of people providing their insights or analysis and providing their evidence there. Yeah, so basically just my personal opinion, what I found interesting. But obviously you guys will probably have your own research and analysis to determine who's winning, who's not winning, as well. There's a lot of propaganda, a lot of fake information, a lot of misinformation as well. So just take everything which I say with a grain of salt. Just add it to your list of sources, and maybe try to get information from both sides as well, because both sides don't always tell the truth. You know, a lot of times they do lie or spread misinformation as well as propaganda. Yep. And so, all in all, can Ukraine actually win? Yes, I believe they can. Um, However, it depends on how much support they can get. So if you look at Europe at the moment, it's not doing too well. There's got high inflation. There's a recession in UK as well. Um, a lot of the Soviet era equipment has probably already been donated to Ukraine as it is. So I don't think they have hundreds of tanks, T-72s laying around in their warehouses anymore, which they can supply to Ukraine. Therefore, it really depends on the US and the US government. So they've provided literally billions of dollars of supplies to Ukraine, as well as equipment as well. They're providing more HIMARS, as you saw in my presentation, and not just HIMARS, but the ammo. The ammo is probably the most important thing, I think, for Ukraine at the moment. So they have also set up a factory to create artillery shells for their Soviet era equipment as well. Yeah, so they can win. Yeah, however, the winter will likely be a very difficult period with possible electricity, water, and ammunition shortages. So it's going to be really tough. They'll have to really grit down as well. So it's going to be a bit like Syria. It's going to be a really tough existence in the next 3 to 6 months as well. And not just the inconveniences of all of that. Russia also has been reinforcing its front lines with mobilized troops. So maybe previously a green area or a tree line might have had 20 soldiers, Russian soldiers. Now might have 70 soldiers in there. So it's really having an impact as well. But then again, if there's more Russians and more Russians which can be killed pretty much or destroyed, especially if they're in a small area. And as well with the Russians, they've obviously had a lot of losses. They've also drained their own ammunition, their rockets, their missiles, the weaponry as well. So currently they're getting supplied from the America's favorite countries, North Korea and Iran, which were obviously both heavily sanctioned by the US. So I guess the US is kind of returning the favor now, or North Korea and Iran are returning the favor to US by supporting Russia. So North Korea has apparently been supplying Russia with artillery shells. I'm assuming North Korea probably has similar sort of ammunition as Russia, like Soviet era as well. And then you have Iran with their drones as well. So the drones have had a big impact. Like has had a big impact on Ukraine. So knocking out like electricity and water supplies. So the Ukrainians now have to line up to get water. They don't have electricity all the time. They probably don't have internet as well, except for Elon Musk's Starlink. And at the same time, Russia is still getting funded quite a lot from its sales of oil and gas to Asia. Yep, so that's pretty much wraps it up. This is just my, like I said, just my thoughts and opinions on the actual war. You'll have yours as well, and hopefully you learnt something today.